because I'll be JD.
Okay, good. And I'll call out your full name just so no one's confused.
Even better, DD.
DD, you're right, D squared. Maybe to start out this question for both of you, so both Johns in this case, how is this crisis similar to what you've seen before, and certainly how has it been different?
JD, why don't you go first, and I'll go second, sir.
Well, this crisis is an accelerator of changes in how we work, live, and relate to each other. But I must tell you, it's like nothing I've ever experienced before. For a long period of time, the scientists told us that there was a probability of a pandemic, a probability, not a certainty. And yet they've been telling us at the same time that it's 100% certain that we'll have a climate crisis. In fact, we experienced that across the world in this last year. So I think what's common between these two is whether or not we pay attention to the science, whether we listen. And I'm going to be hopeful and optimistic that we can do that in these really important matters. But as our audience knows as well as we do, our teams are under stress, families are under stress, and for a lucky few, we can work at home, but for the world at large, the good news is vaccines are getting approved and they appear to be very effective. The bad news is we're going to enter the worst times in the immediate months ahead.
Mm-hmm.
So Doug, from my perspective, this is my sixth financial crisis. It's my fifth pandemic, although clearly the toughest one. We actually, as you know, invented the video conferencing with telepresence after the bird flu pandemic in Mexico, which thank goodness was not near as rough as we originally thought. We were with the president of Mexico when that broke out in 2006. It's my third supply chain crisis, and I share John's concern about the environment. This environmental crisis is just ongoing and scaling. It's similar in many ways in terms of how you deal with the crisis. You want to say how much was created by the crisis in terms of your business challenges and how much was self-inflicted, and you've got to be able to do both together. You develop your 3 to 5 plays that you make off of that with customers, your employees, your investors, the media, et cetera. You paint the picture of your North Star, how you're going to come out of this, and then you execute and you assume it will last longer than than you think, and it'll be deeper. And when I said that in March and said it's going to be a real problem, a minimum of 3 to 4 quarters in the market on CNBC, they said, John, you're a pessimist. That's out of character for you. And I said, no, probably a realistic optimist. This is going to be tough for us. And it was. How is it different? It's 4 crises occurring at the same time. We've never seen that. And that requires agility and speed of movement that we haven't seen before. It will result in accelerating probably 40 to 50% of the large established companies not being around in 10 years. And you're starting to see that already, even relatively quickly. What changed was that the startups that are venture capital backed technology wise, and John Doerr knows these numbers even better than I do, 50% of the startups that were venture capital backed tech companies in the US went out of business in the dot-com bubble of 2000, 2001. During the Great Recession of 2008, 30% of the venture capital backed startups went out of business. The surprise to me was, if you had asked me, Doug, I would have said the number is going to be about 40% this time. It looks like, John Doerr, it's going to be under 10%. And that was a very pleasant surprise. Now, these are technology venture backed. That occurred because technology is playing a whole different role than before. And candidly, the availability of money through VCs and the market as a whole is a much higher rate. So that was the surprise on it. The transition, I hope the people already in on this call, is I hope that you've already adjusted your expenses, did your scenario planning, your stages that you communicate to your employee groups, et cetera. And now you're beginning to think about, as we come out of this, what is my strategy to return to growth, still be frugal economically, but how do you move on that? So similar in some ways, different in others.
John, I have a thing I've always thought about. When I was at Cisco and John wanted to acquire a SaaS company, we acquired WebEx and we did it in 8 days, and it was pretty amazing. And I was, exciting enough to be part of that. And when I started to head up the WebEx asset inside of Cisco, I thought, why would anybody get on an airplane when they can use Cisco telepresence and use WebEx to do meeting and sharing and video? And I was really surprised that the world kind of didn't take to it. And we still climbed on planes, incredibly inefficient. Well, it took a pandemic, John, to show the world how powerful these technologies that we acquired way back when can actually be. And thank goodness for things like Zoom, because it showed the world how efficient they can be with this technology in this incredibly tough time. So, John Doerr, let me ask you this. This thing is called Goal Summit. I consider you the son of OKRs, having worked for Andy Grove, the father of OKRs. And you're passionate about this, and you've seen the impact of OKRs and CFRs on a lot of the portfolio companies that you've worked with. And you're using this term called facts. Can you tell us a little bit about just, your overall journey with OKRs, and tell us what the facts are?
Well, sure. Thanks for that question. My journey began as a summer student at Intel Company, and it was the very early days there. They just invented the 8-bit microprocessor, and Andy Grove opened up the first ever Intel University. He called it IOPEC, for Intel's Organization, Philosophy, and Economics, and he taught most of the courses himself. I talked my way into this class. I don't know how exactly, but here's the point. Andy had a really compelling lecture on how it is that we get thousands of engineers and workers at Intel, all focused and aligned, committed, tracking their progress and stretching for nearly amazing things. And those, he made clear, were the facts: focus, alignment, commitment, tracking, and stretching. And those are the payoffs. Those are the benefits of this thing. So important in the semiconductor industry, because thousands of people have got to get lines that are 1 micron wide exactly right, or nothing works at all. So he described the culture at Intel as a place full of aggressive introverts who wanted to have a meritocracy where the best ideas could get on the table. You could confront problems without confronting people, and as a result, move faster. Now, this book tells a dozen stories of how people use Andy Grove's OKRs, objectives and key results, to, in some cases, start the Gates Foundation, or in other cases, nurture their startup. But it's an amazingly powerful tool. And I've always believed that if you set your goals clearly, transparently, and collaboratively, that you're much more likely to achieve them. And so in these uncertain times, when knowledge workers need to know what's going on and need to feel engaged, there's no more powerful tool than to use a system like this together with the new video technologies. It's not a substitute for great management. It's not a silver bullet, but I think it's an essential way to achieve operating excellence.
Thank you for that. And for those of you on with us today, please stick around through this entire morning session, because I have a little surprise for you at the end if you stick around. So I appreciate that. John, I am John Chambers. I've always loved the saying that you have. You find out who your real leaders are in a crisis. And, I've watched you actually manage through, as you said, many of these crises while I was at Cisco. Do you have any advice today for people that are kind of in their first one, and what they should be thinking about and doing?
Well, I think many of the companies on this are tech companies on the session, and managing through the crisis is a replicatable process. You hit one of the key elements, Doug, at the very beginning when you said they're going through it for the first time. It's important that leaders, regardless of whether you're the leader of the company, one of the founders, or an individual contributor within the company, to know what you know and know what you don't. And that's one of the things that gets a lot of people into trouble. They try to think because they're a really good engineer they know how to deal with sales, or they know how to deal with a crisis. And usually that's not the case at all. This is where I think the Valley's been so strong with VCs such as John Doerr and others that are more of a business partner than an investor and helping you manage through it. Third, understand it will be unpleasant. Leadership is really lonely. I never understood that when Shimon Peres, the late president of Israel, said, John, leadership is lonely. I said, Shimon, I got 40,000 people around me. The paparazzi are following me in my car, taking pictures. Everybody wants to talk about the stock. And he said, no, John, when it gets tough, you will be by yourself. And he was right. It was brutal. I can't tell you the pain that you go through. You're trying to make the right decisions. And you need to know that's also going to occur. But the key is life was full of replicatable patterns, as John Doerr would give you so many stories on. And watch those patterns and say, how do you adjust? Except this time, they're occurring remarkably fast and with speed. There is no entitlement. There is no entitlement that Silicon Valley continues to be the Silicon Valley of the world. In fact, I'd argue we are in jeopardy of losing that. There is no entitlement just because you lead before that you're going to lead afterwards. But the cool thing is, anybody out there has the ability to dream and say, how do we make those dreams come true? And it's how you manage through your setbacks, your crisis, even if you inflicted them yourself, that determines who you are as a company. And as Jack Welch taught me, he said, John, you're never going to have a great company until you have a major setback. And I said, I did in 93, 97, et cetera. 2001, we went for the most valuable company in the world. We won every award there was to win on corporate social responsibility, CEO leadership, to people like Jim Cramer questioned, should I even run Cisco? Very humbling. But Jack called me up at the end of that year and said, it was the best year you've ever had. I said, Jack, it doesn't feel like it. People are losing confidence in me, including some of my own employees. The market's been brutal on me. I feel like I let down people, et cetera. He said, no, this was your best year because you navigated through this. The majority of your peers did not. I said, you're going to be the only one that ever told me that. And he was. So there's a kind of the lessons. And I guess the last thing, Doug, that I would, for your audience, say, tell stories. I tend to be very analytical. Here are the 10 things that you need to do great acquisitions or manage through a crisis. People won't remember those 1 month later. If you tell the story, as John Doerr does so very well, behind your strategies, people remember the stories and then put them into action.
Yeah, John, that's a powerful. I've seen that work in Cisco. People probably don't realize it long ago now, but at one point in time, Cisco went from 14,000 people when I started in 1998 to 48,000 people in 2 years. We hired 5,000 people. I opened up a class every Monday at Cisco for 1,200 new hires. And John, our whole deal was we spent 8 hours with these new hires, and all we did was tell stories.
Yes.
And it kept the culture together in an amazing way.
You just hit a key element that John Doerr and I think both agree on. We think of the strategy of leaders about strategy and vision of their company, building the leadership team to implement that strategy and vision, communications, but what is often underestimated is culture. You never have a strong company without a very strong culture. You may like the culture, you may not, but whether it's an Amazon, a Cisco, a Microsoft, you do have the cultures that are very key. People underestimate how important that is. The reason we had 5% turnover per year voluntary in an industry that averaged 15% was all culture. The reason our acquired companies only attrited 4% after we acquired them in an industry that averages 25% for acquired companies was all about culture. And so that's one of the other things I encourage people on this broadcast to really think and look inwardly. Do you really articulate your culture of your company well and understand it may be more important in getting through the crisis than actually your strategy is, or at least equal.
You like a family, John.
Yes.
You did. John Doerr, you've seen so many incredible companies in your career, and could you maybe give an example of one that you're proud of in terms of their use of OKRs and their journey on it?
Sure. I want to build on John Chambers' notion of culture here, because I realize we haven't defined OKRs. The objective, that's the O in OKR, is what you want to have accomplished. The KR, or the key result, is how we're going to get it done. But culture answers the more fundamental question, which is why we do the work that we do. So what, how, and why? And as I believe Peter Drucker said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. That culture allows the team, everyone, to make the right decisions more quickly without referring to a kind of rule book. And so culture is key. One company with an extraordinary culture that I was privileged to be part of almost from the beginning is Intuit Company. And we tell the story in the book of Atticus Tyson, who is the CIO, the head of technology there. To this day, he wanted to improve the coordination across his teams that were in 3 different corners of the world: India, Europe, and here in North America. And so he got on the internet. He used this thing called Google to find out about goal setting. And lo and behold, he learned about OKRs, learned about BetterWorks, and initially deployed that goal setting system across a team of 1,200, maybe 1,700 developers in all different time zones. And this was a company that famously won and wins awards for being a really great place to work, with a set of values that were established both by its current executive chairman and founder, Scott Cook, and one of my greatest mentors, Coach Bill Campbell, who I recruited to be the CEO there. And so Atticus used this within his team and organization, and the rest of the company took notice. And so today, something like 17,000 Intuit knowledge workers every quarter write down their objectives, their key results, grade them, they post them transparently, and yet they're not used directly for bonuses or promotions. They serve a higher purpose, which is a kind of social contract that, above all else, they're going to delight customers. And it's an integral part of their operation. You've seen Intuit, Doug. What would you add about how they use the system and the difference it makes?
John, it's been really fantastic. I mean, what the rest of the organization witnessed with Atticus's leadership was people achieving things they haven't been able to achieve before at an incredible speed. They would tell you almost 2 times faster than they had historically been able to. So the rest of the organization took notice. So they now use us for our entire capability, which is around, you talked about it, objective and key results. They use us for conversations. So quarterly conversations around how are you doing against the achievement of those goals? What roadblocks are you hitting? How, as a manager, can I help you lower those roadblocks and help you achieve more? They use us for feedback and recognition throughout the organization. So all 9,000 people at Intuit today are deeply embedded with the BetterWorks application. It's great to see. John Chambers, one of the other things that, again, I've watched you do is see around corners. What's around the corner for us, given what's going on? I'd also just quickly say to the listening audience, if you have any questions for Mr. Chambers or Mr. Doerr, just put them into the chat window and we'll get to those.
Yeah, just address them to John. I'll give the hard ones to John Doerr. I'll take the easy one on it. I've had the chance to watch so many brilliant people in Silicon Valley. There was only one Steve Jobs that just somehow knew how to build things. And I know John Doerr, he was a good friend of yours. I admire him very much in terms of his innovation. But most of us don't have that skill. What I do is I crowdsource constantly. I have since, without realizing it, way back to college, listen constantly and believe that everybody can add value regardless of their position to trends, et cetera. And then when I see a pattern, then I run the pattern hard. But at the core of that is I listen to my customers. I listen to, as you know, every critical account in the world every night, 365 days a year. Because we listen to our customers, they would tell us who to buy. And it was a customer, the NASDAQ, the CEO of the NASDAQ, that told me to buy the company you referred to on a Thursday night. And he said, "John, you're an idiot. Why haven't you bought this?" And I was embarrassed because I didn't know what they did. I didn't even know the name of the company. I felt better when the business development guy that I said, I want you over there the next morning, didn't know it either. And we met with the CEO. We had a handshake at noon on Friday to do a $3 billion acquisition, announced it Monday morning. And this is where OKRs, a replicatable pattern of a playbook, allow you to move with speed. And it worked great for us. And, you know, in any area, when you do these acquisitions and you get to scale, then you've got to say, what do you do next? Because it, you know, in a product or an area only lasts for 3 to 5 years. We did remarkably well with the video conferencing, got us into a whole new arena at large companies we were not in before. We moved out of being techies, moving around bits and bytes, to changing business models and changing the way you work, live, learn, and play. But it is that type of replication that becomes very, very key. And so when you combine the lessons that John Doerr talked about, that I've talked about, with the right culture, the right strategy, that's when you can literally own markets and disrupt others.
John, maybe just a comment. You know, I've watched you also walk away from acquisitions because of culture.
Yes.
You know?
It goes back to, very often people don't understand what they're acquiring when they acquire a company. It sounds basic, but they don't. They are making a financial decision. Many years ago, just to keep it politically safe, when Nations bought Bank of America, what Hugh McCall was doing was not acquiring the people at Bank of America. He was acquiring customers and geography. And he was very plain about that. And he didn't keep a lot of the leaders. In our industry and technology, you're acquiring people and next generation product. So in my opinion, the reason 90% of acquisitions fail in high tech is they forget what they're acquiring and then they don't protect it. That goes back to the turnover we talked about. When we acquired a company, if the culture wasn't very similar, if we couldn't keep the key founders, keep the key engineers, and we'd ask them to sign up for a minimum of 2 years, and then we kept them after that, we wouldn't acquire the company. Or if during the middle of the negotiations, we realized there was a cultural mismatch, like no surprises, good or bad, and somebody deliberately misled us, no matter how good the financial decision was, literally we'd fold up our laptops and leave. And so a key element that I think our acquisitions were successful, those were not, I never tried to acquire a company that had a different culture. Doesn't mean the culture was right or wrong, but our company, as you articulated, was more a collaborative, a family type culture, focused on customers, far from perfect, but just do the right thing, period. And that's how we made our decisions. And if another company was more, didn't include the employees, we made 10,000 millionaires, as you know, in the first 10 years I was there, of our employees. Many people would keep all the stock for the people at the top. If they didn't share with their employees, we wouldn't acquire them either. So I think it's a key aspect, and it goes back to what JD and I are both saying is things are very replicatable. The companies who figure that out have an underlying fabric that allows that to occur with tremendous speed and agility, end up winning.
Great. John Doerr, how big is culture in your decision to invest?
Culture is the most important decision. The thing I try to figure out first is when I'm meeting an entrepreneur or a team is, would I mind getting into trouble with them? I remember when I first met Jeff Bezos, he came bounding down from a loft with his big honking kind of voice. You could always locate him. Jeff took me around to Amazon's distribution center, which was the back of this loft. It was some tables built out of Home Depot doors that were self-assembled, and I immediately formed the opinion from his optimism, enthusiasm, and the way he related to his people that I wouldn't mind getting into trouble with Jeff, and we did. You know, the company almost failed 2 or 3 times even after it was public. So I think culture matters more now than ever before. I'm going to read you just 2 sentences out of this book about culture. In the past, employees just needed to do the next thing right, to follow the instruction and orders to the letter. And culture didn't matter so much. But now we're living in a world where we're asking people to do the next right thing. A rule book can tell you what you can or can't do, but you need culture to tell you what you should do. That from Dov Seidemann of How.
You know, one of the lessons, piggybacking on what John just said, and I could not agree more, is for those companies listening to this broadcast, sit down at your next staff meeting. Don't tell the team ahead of time you're going to do it, and say, write down what is our culture. It will surprise you. Some people will do it remarkably well, others will not. And if you do it right, culture has to be easy to understand. It has to be very specific to what you do and don't do. And I would argue every decision you make, if you have your culture articulated properly, it will tell you what decision you need to make. And it will keep you out of trouble, to John's point as well. Just sharing a little bit of some of the challenges. At one point in time, a quote, theoretical whistleblower said we had a problem in Russia and that we were using our capabilities and finances inappropriately. And both the SEC and the Justice Department began a 2 to 3 year investigation of us. At the end of 2 to 3 years, they did something I don't think I've ever seen them do. They said we were completely squeaky clean, and that they weren't even going to come and say, here are the areas you need to improve and pay a small penalty. The reason we got that was purely culture. Just do the right thing. From the beginning, we told our channels in Russia, there is no gray on this. We will not walk across the line. We told our employees the same thing.
I think we froze up a little bit.
A handful of companies in the world that could have survived that and come out of it like we did if they used distribution channels like we did.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Well, we're getting some questions. Let me make some questions from the audience here. John Doerr, I've read the book. I've listened to the book, which I love and highly recommend. I even subscribe to somebody in your family sending this in. I even subscribe to the newsletter. It's still hard to start. Are there any templates that ones you could use, training wheels, so to speak, on getting going with OKRs?
Sure. I'm just going to echo this plug. The audio version of this book is really inspirational because we have the storytellers in their own voice. You can hear Bono or hear Bill Gates about how they use this in their lives. So that's the best version. Look, there's a wealth of resources on the web that can guide you through setting up, getting started with OKRs. Betterworks.com is a resource. So is whatmatters.org. And I think the best way to start is to take your team offsite for a half day and make a list on the whiteboard of the things that really matter. Try to have honest, open prioritization, and then cast them in the framework that Andy Grove invented. He said, look, really great objectives are long-lived and they're inspirational. And then key results are aggressive, but still realistic. They're all measurable. And so you can cast them in that form. You can have them be hierarchical or ladder them up throughout your team. But I'd go through that exercise, and then your experience is normal. It's going to take a year to get good at OKRs. You build what Doug Dennerlein likes to call your goal setting muscle. We've talked a lot in this conversation about OKRs. I want to tell you they're only half the story, though they may be 2/3 of the book. To really bring these to life, you want to have OKRs become part of the language of your organization. They're available in a staff meeting. They can guide a one-on-one meeting. But equally important are the conversations and the feedback that you give your teammates and fellow workers, your direct reports, to get to this nirvana of operating excellence. I'll close with this analogy. It's like a football game, an American football game, where getting the touchdown is the ultimate way to score goals. But to make your way there, if the objective is the goal line, the key results are the 10-yard markers. You get a first down, you get a first down. But there's a lot more going on to win the game. There's the huddle, there's the post-game video reviews, there's the training and the coaching. And that kind of in-the-moment feedback, not in annual performance review, but in-the-moment feedback is what's so valuable to bringing these kinds of goals to life. Is that your experience, John Chambers?
It absolutely is. Very much agree, John.
So John Chambers, here's a question for you. It says, you mentioned leadership is lonely. Agreed. I have the impression that 2020 was a lonely year for many people in many ways, especially in the world of work. Any advice or tips on how to mitigate that or create a different condition in these days?
I think it's a question we all wrestle with. What works for me, and by the way, I will be so happy when 2020 is over. It's been the toughest year of my life, both business-wise, personally, etc., on it. But I had two parents who were doctors, and this may not work for everyone, but they drilled into my head from the very beginning, you've got to deal with the world the way it is, not the way you wish it was. And they drilled in not to spend any time looking backwards, other than to quickly learn. So I'm an optimist by nature. I think a realistic optimist. I get up every morning, Doug. My pupils are dilated. Elaine gives me a hard time, but I love what I do. And I go with all the energy. And I learn to take problems as a challenge. And how do you take a challenge, motivate a team to focus on what they can control, waste no cycles on what they don't, and how do you move forward? That works for me. It may not work for others. And I know that over 50% of America has said they've been depressed, many of them for the first time in their life this year because of the challenges. But I go back to the golden rule here, which is I waste no cycles on wishing this illness didn't occur or cycles on things I cannot change. I focus on where the opportunities are. And I bring the whole organization with me. The frustration is when people get tight and under stress on things they can't control, you as a leader have to show where they can make a difference and lead them to that conclusion.
Yeah, John, you've always been, what I think is personally what's happening is empathy has never been a better quality in a leader today than today. And I've never seen you begin a conversation that you didn't say, how are you feeling today? Right? I mean, you used to catch it, you walk in the elevator with John Chambers is, how you doing? I mean, the first thing he wants to know is about you. And I think it's probably my advice to leaders today is it can't all be about business. It's got to be about people. You're in people's homes now. Their children, their dogs, their spouses, whoever are in the background hearing what's going on. I mean, invite them into the conversation. In my company, we have babies on laps and cats on laps, and that's okay. So, one of the big ones for me too. What do you think one of the biggest benefits that has come out of this pandemic about work? And that's to either one of you.
Sure. I'll go first, and then John will give a better answer on it. I think one of the biggest benefits is that we've changed the whole philosophy about work, that you don't have to physically necessarily be together. And Doug, I got a million miles on every airline imaginable traveling around the world. In hindsight, that was a lot of wasted cycles or not used as effectively, where probably 80% of the time you could have done it if you had general accepted technologies that both sides were comfortable with on it. The second thing is it taught speed. The companies who didn't move, especially non-tech companies with speed, got into trouble in terms of the direction. And I think even though it was very stressful for many families, I've talked to so many people whose families units have actually gotten tighter through this and through the challenges. But going back to the culture question just very quickly, it's important to not only ask, how are you doing today? But when you have a Joe Pinto say, okay, Joe never says okay. When he said okay, there's a problem. And so I would say, Joe, what is different on it? And it's amazing how many leaders don't even know that their employees are having a issue that is very important to them with a loved one or a brother or with one of their pets that they've had for 10 years on it. And so it's getting to know people and knowing what's important. And when they're under stress, that's when they really need you. They don't need you when things are going well. And when there's stress at home, it always spills into work. So understanding when members of your team are under stress, cut them a little bit more of a break, let them know you're there for them, and have the courage to share when you yourself are under a little bit more stress than normal. Originally, I thought that was a weakness. It's not. It's a strength.
John Doerr?
What I've seen in my life and many others is I'm wasting a lot less time traveling. There's less intimacy in the meetings that we have. There's a premium now on communications and on being concise and being clear. My meetings, whether they're a board meeting or a presentation to a prospective customer, are all a lot shorter. So I think we're more acutely aware of and wasting less time. And
Yeah.
I do think I have a suggestion and then a challenge for the audience. One of the things I discovered, I'm among the billion people that use Google for my calendaring, but you can set an option called speedy meetings. And instead of life being a series of Zooms that run right up to the half-hour mark or hour, that'll end every meeting by default 5 minutes or 10 minutes early, which gives you some time to decompress and walk around wherever you're having your meeting, and that for all your teammates. So the other thing that I think this more remote environment can allow us to do is practice random acts of kindness, is what I call them. Sounds like something that John Chambers would do as a routine, but finding a way to reach out with a virtual add a girl or taking somebody out to a DoorDash dinner remotely, playing a game online with your kids or your family, sharing the latest Netflix, watching those together. The human touch, but we can't literally be there, is even more important. So
very good.
Those are my two thoughts.
We're running up on the time here. Real quickly, for me, the most powerful thing is, as a CEO, I've never thought like I'm thinking now, which is I can find the best talent wherever they reside in the world. And, before I'd be like, well, that's my marketing person, they need to be with me here in Redwood City. It's really expanded my horizons about just finding the best people wherever they might reside. And that's been a big one. So real quick, maybe just what do you want to share? We're at the end. Is there some things that you'd like to share with this audience before we go away? And then I have, again, the special offer for folks. So don't run away quite yet. Any closing thoughts, John, Doerr?
I would say it's really important. I may have mentioned this earlier, that your team understand why you're adopting a sharing, a transparent kind of goal setting in the form of OKRs and then the payoff with CFRs. And those, again, are just the facts. You're doing it so you can be better focused, aligned, committed, tracking the progress of everyone, and stretching to achieve really amazing things. Because it'll be work in the beginning, but a year into this mission, if you're doing it well, you're going to find people love it. It's fun. It gives them more recognition and more understanding of what's going on in your organization and team, and we all want to see how we fit into the big picture and own a piece of the team's success. Those are just the facts.
Yeah, thank you, John. Well, it looks like we might have lost the feed from John Chambers there, unfortunately, right at the very end. But with that, let me tell you about this amazing offer that both John Doerr and John Chambers would like to make. Having both now been authors of these incredible books, if you send me an email at doug@betterworks.com, I will send you either John or John Chambers and John Doerr's book, or one or the other. If you send me that email with your address where we can ship it to you, they've offered to sign those, and we'll send it to you directly for spending some time with us. And John, I can't thank you enough. I wish I could thank John Chambers as well. He's an amazing guy.
He is amazing.
One of my most amazing stories, really quick, John, before I let you go from the audience, is this is the kind of guy John is. I had an SE in my organization at Cisco that had been diagnosed with a brain tumor that was on a rating of 1 to 10 and 9, and no one would operate on him. They basically said, sorry, it's not inoperable. And John Chambers said, I refused to that answer. He got the 4 best brain surgeons on the planet on a call, sent the MRI to all 4 brain surgeons, one in one in Bethesda, Maryland, offered to do the surgery. That SC still works for Cisco today.
Wow.
I mean, that's the kind of guy that John was as a leader. So I'll leave you that. I want to thank everybody for being part of the session. John, thanks so much. And enjoy the rest of the day. Hopefully you found this useful.
What is your email address again?
It's Doug, DOUG, @betterworks.com.